We all carry within us patterns that shape our destiny, some visible, others hidden in the shadows of our mind. The path to transformation is not in adding more to your life, but in discerning what must quietly fall away. True change requires a silent shedding of what no longer serves your growth. Today, let us explore 10 things you must eliminate from your life if you truly wish to change. First, eliminate the voices that speak for you but are not yours. Society, family, and friends offer guidance, yet often these voices drown out your own inner knowing. The power to live authentically begins by recognizing which directives are truly yours and which are inherited chains binding you to a life not of your choosing. Second, eliminate the illusions of perfection. Perfection is a mask, a silent tyrant that drains your vitality and fuels constant dissatisfaction. Embrace your imperfections as necessary companions on the journey of becoming. Only then can the true self emerge from the shadows, free from the weight of impossible standards. Third, eliminate relationships that drain rather than nourish. Some connections are silent poisons, disguised as obligation or habit. To change, you must discern those who energize your growth from those who feed on your light, and gently, without fanfare, step away from what diminishes you. Fourth, eliminate the fear of solitude. Many flee from themselves in endless distraction, yet the quiet moments reveal the deepest truths. Solitude is not loneliness, it is a mirror, reflecting both your light and your shadow. Only by facing yourself in silence can you begin to change in profound ways. Fifth, eliminate unresolved grudges and bitterness. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting another to suffer. The mind and spirit stagnate in the soil of bitterness. Forgiveness, even if silent and unseen, clears the way for renewal and opens space for possibilities previously unimagined. Sixth, eliminate the need for external validation. Your worth is not measured by the applause of others or the fleeting admiration of the crowd. When you release the need to be seen, you begin to act from an inner compass guided by the authenticity of your desires rather than the expectations of the world. Seventh, eliminate distraction from your purpose. The modern world inundates us with noise, yet every distraction steals precious energy from the work of becoming. To transform, you must cultivate focus, discern what matters, and quietly let go of what diverts your attention from your own inner call. Eighth, eliminate unexamined habits. Habits are powerful currents that shape your destiny without your awareness. The first step in change is observation. Which habits are silently eroding your potential? Which patterns, repeated without thought, have become barriers to growth? Awareness precedes liberation. Ninth, eliminate self-deception. We often craft stories about who we are, masking fears, desires, and truths. Transformation demands brutal honesty with oneself. Face the truths you hide in shadow. Confront the aspects of yourself you wish to ignore. Only then can genuine change take root. 10th, eliminate the illusion of control. Life unfolds in ways beyond our planning, and the more we cling to certainty, the more we suffer. Release the need to master every outcome. Trust in the unfolding, in the interplay between what you can influence and what is beyond you. In this surrender, freedom is found, and true transformation becomes possible. To change your life, you do not need loud declarations or external validation. You need a quiet courage to shed what hinders, a patient willingness to face yourself honestly, and a silent commitment to nurture the self that emerges from the ashes of the old. Transformation begins in silence, in the invisible work of eliminating, observing, and integrating. In the journey of life, we are surrounded by countless voices of society, of family, of friends, of culture, and of tradition. These voices, though often well-intentioned, have a subtle and persistent way of shaping our thoughts, our desires, and our very sense of self. From the earliest moments of consciousness, we are attuned to the opinion and judgments of others, and in doing so, we begin to form a self that is often borrowed from those around us, from the expectations placed upon us, from the roles we are asked to play. It is a quiet process, almost imperceptible at first, but over time it can dominate the very core of our being, leading us down paths that are not of our choosing. To change one's life fundamentally, the first and most crucial step is to discern these external voices from the inner voice that is uniquely our own. The inner voice, the one that arises from the depths of the psyche, is often drowned out by a cacophony of opinions, advice, judgments, and rules imposed upon us. It speaks softly, subtly, often in whispers that we are too distracted or too conditioned to hear. It is not loud. It does not demand attention, but it is persistent and true. It is the compass of authenticity, guiding us toward a life that is genuinely ours. To begin this process of elimination, one must cultivate the skill of listening, not merely hearing, but listening with attention and discernment, listening to the voices that arise from within, noticing the subtle pull of desires that feel organic, recognizing the discomfort or heaviness that comes when one follows a path dictated by others rather than chosen by the self. It is in this subtle awareness that transformation begins. Every choice we make that aligns with someone else's expectations strengthens the chains of external influence, and every choice made from the inner voice loosens those chains, even if only slightly. The path to authenticity is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, almost invisible, but its effects are profound. Each decision, each moment of conscious alignment with the self reinforces the possibility of a life lived on one's own terms. This process requires courage, for it is not easy to confront the myriad ways in which we have been shaped by others. Many of these influences are subtle, internalized over years, and often carry the weight of love, duty, or loyalty. To reject them is not an act of rebellion in the conventional sense, but a gentle yet firm act of reclaiming the self. It is important to understand that this reclamation is not about hostility toward others, nor is it about abandoning relationships or responsibilities. Rather, it is about discerning what belongs to the self and what does not, and creating the space to live in accordance with one's own truth. In this discernment lies freedom, a freedom that is both quiet and transformative. A freedom that nurtures the inner life and allows the self to flourish without obstruction. The voices of society are particularly insidious, for they present themselves as norms, rules, and standards that must be followed. They tell us what success looks like, what beauty is, what is acceptable, and what is forbidden. These voices shape our ambitions, our fears, and even our sense of morality. They are so pervasive that we rarely recognize their influence until we pause and reflect deeply. By examining the values we hold, the goals we pursue, and the beliefs we defend, we can begin to trace their origins. Are they truly ours, born from our own reflection and experience, or are they inherited from a world that seeks conformity and compliance? The first step toward liberation is acknowledging that these voices exist, that they have shaped our behavior, and that they can be gently set aside in favor of the voice that emerges from within. Family and close relationships often carry similar weight. From early childhood, we internalize expectations about who we should be, how we should act, and what we should desire. Love, care, and acceptance are often contingent upon conformity, and this subtle conditioning can persist long into adulthood. To follow the inner voice is not to reject family or to sever ties, but to cultivate clarity about one's own needs, aspirations, and boundaries. It is to understand that genuine love and connection arise not from compliance, but from authenticity. When we honor our own voice, we allow others the opportunity to encounter us in truth, unmediated by the masks of obligation or inherited expectation. Friends and colleagues also contribute their subtle influences, sometimes with encouragement, sometimes with critique, sometimes without intention at all. Opinions, advice, comparisons, and judgments shape our decisions, often unconsciously. While guidance and support can be valuable, the danger lies in allowing these external inputs to override our own inner knowing. A life led primarily by the expectations and desires of others is one in which the self becomes fragmented, in which the deepest aspirations are muted, and in which the true potential remains unrealized. To change one's life, one must develop the quiet confidence to listen first to the inner voice before yielding to the chorus outside. This inner voice is often expressed through subtle signs, an inexplicable pull toward certain experiences, a quiet disquiet in the presence of certain choices, moments of insight that arise in reflection, dreams that speak in imagery rather than words, intuition that nudges when the mind is silent. These signals are not always dramatic or immediate. They require patience, observation, and trust. To ignore them is to remain bound to a life dictated by others. To heed them is to step into the journey of self-realization, a journey that is both demanding and deeply rewarding. The process of silent elimination is therefore not violent or confrontational. It is not about shouting one's independence or rejecting all external influence indiscriminately. Rather, it is a careful, deliberate process of noticing, reflecting, and choosing. It is about distinguishing the noise from the signal, recognizing that while some voices offer wisdom and guidance, Others simply perpetuate patterns that no longer serve growth. The task is to honor the voice that emerges from the depths, the one that is uniquely attuned to one's own life, experiences, and calling. Each step in this process brings a subtle yet profound shift. With each voice that is set aside, clarity grows. The self, long hidden beneath layers of expectation, begins to emerge. The mind and spirit experience a quiet liberation, a sense of alignment that was previously obscured. Life does not become simpler in the external sense, but it becomes truer, richer, and more resonant. Choices arise not from obligation or fear, but from genuine reflection and action. Flow with a sense of integrity and authenticity that was previously impossible. In recognizing the distinction between external voices and the inner voice, one begins to understand the delicate balance between influence and authenticity. Influence is inevitable. Humans are social beings, and connection requires engagement. Yet influence becomes detrimental when it overrides the inner voice, when it silences the self, when it dictates the path, without regard for the unique potential of the individual. To change one's life, one must cultivate discernment, a quiet wisdom that observes, reflects, and chooses. It is through this quiet elimination of unchosen voices that the self is restored to its natural state, a state in which growth, creativity, and transformation are possible, a state in which the journey is directed not by inherited expectation, but by the inner compass that guides toward fulfillment and meaning. Fear is one of the most subtle and insidious forces in human life, a quiet companion that shapes thoughts, actions, and decisions often without conscious awareness. It manifests not only as obvious anxiety but also in hesitation, doubt, and avoidance. To transform one's life, one must confront the fears that have taken root, the resentments that quietly fester, and the relentless craving for validation from the world outside. These are chains that, though invisible, bind the spirit and hinder authentic growth. They operate silently, shaping behavior, constraining choices, and limiting the full expression of the self. The first step in this silent elimination is to observe how fear dictates patterns of thought and action. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown. These are not simply obstacles but formative influences that can define a person's trajectory. The individual who allows fear to dominate lives, reactively rather than creatively, shaped by avoidance rather than by the courage to confront life's uncertainties. Bitterness and resentment are companions to fear, often emerging from past experiences of injustice, disappointment, or betrayal. They are subtle poisons, dwelling in the psyche, shaping perception and interaction with others. The person who carries resentment interprets the present through the lens of the past, allowing memories of hurt to dictate the possibilities of the moment. To release these burdens is not to excuse the actions of others or to diminish the reality of past suffering, but to liberate oneself from the invisible prison that resentment creates. Each moment spent in quiet bitterness is a moment in which the potential for growth and transformation is lost. By eliminating these lingering emotional toxins, one creates space for insight, creativity, and authentic engagement with life. The process is silent, occurring first in reflection and acknowledgement, then in gradual release, allowing the spirit to reclaim its freedom. The need for external validation is another subtle force that shapes human experience. It is rooted in the desire for acceptance, recognition, and affirmation from those beyond oneself. While connection and appreciation are natural human desires, dependence on them for self-worth diminishes autonomy and fosters a fragile sense of identity. The individual who seeks validation constantly looks outward for approval, measuring success by applause, popularity, or comparison with others. This external orientation weakens the inner voice, which thrives in silence, reflection, and alignment with one's own principles. To remove this need for constant validation is to cultivate self-reliance, a quiet confidence in one's own judgment, and a recognition that worth is intrinsic, not granted. It is a return to the self as the measure, rather than society, culture, or circumstance. To confront fear, resentment, and the need for validation, one must cultivate awareness. This awareness is not a superficial noticing, but a deep, reflective engagement with the internal landscape, observing the origins of fear, the triggers of resentment, and the subtle moments when external validation is sought reveals patterns that have been ingrained often since childhood. Such recognition is uncomfortable, for it exposes the vulnerability, insecurities, and attachments that one may have long avoided. Yet, It is in this discomfort that the opportunity for transformation arises. By facing these hidden forces, the individual begins to dismantle their silent power and reclaim autonomy over thoughts, emotions, and actions. Fear often masks itself as rational caution, presenting scenarios of danger or loss that are projected onto the future. Yet these projections are rarely accurate reflections of reality. They are constructed narratives shaped by past experience, social conditioning, and personal insecurities. To live authentically, one must distinguish between prudent judgment and fear-driven avoidance. This requires an ongoing process of reflection, questioning, and deliberate choice. The individual who learns to recognize fear as a signal rather than a command begins to act from discernment rather than reaction. In this way, fear becomes a guide, not a jailer, illuminating areas that require attention without dictating the course of life. Resentment, like fear, has a quiet power to shape reality. It creates patterns of thought in which the past is continually relived, coloring perceptions of present relationships, opportunities, and self-concept. Often, resentment arises from unmet expectations, unresolved conflict, or unhealed wounds. To confront it, one must engage in deep introspection, acknowledging the existence of these emotional burdens, understanding their origins, and recognizing the ways they influence current behavior. This process requires patience and self-compassion, for resentment is rarely overcome through force or denial. It is released gradually, as awareness grows, as old narratives are questioned, and as the individual cultivates a willingness to let the past remain in the past. In doing so, one frees energy previously consumed by bitterness, allowing attention, creativity, and emotional capacity to flow toward life-affirming endeavors. External validation is perhaps the most pervasive and subtle of these influences. Its presence is so normalized in social structures, in culture, and in daily interactions that its effects are often invisible. The constant seeking of approval, the reliance on comparison, and the shaping of behavior to meet others' expectations subtly erode the authenticity of the self. By observing when and how this need manifests, the individual can begin to disentangle personal desires from social pressures. This disentangling is not abrupt. It is a process of quiet reclamation, learning to derive satisfaction, affirmation, and worth from the self rather than from external sources. As this dependency diminishes, the individual begins to act with integrity, guided by inner principles rather than the shifting tides of approval and disapproval. The process of eliminating fear, resentment, and the need for external validation is intertwined. Each element reinforces the others, forming a network of invisible constraints that limit growth. Fear fosters resentment, resentment strengthens dependence on validation, and validation amplifies fear of judgment or failure. By addressing these forces simultaneously, one begins to dissolve the network, replacing it with self-awareness, self-compassion, and inner strength. This inner work is quiet, largely invisible to the external world, but its effects ripple through every aspect of life, altering relationships, choices, and the sense of possibility itself. This process also requires patience, for these patterns are deeply ingrained and often reinforced over decades. Transformation is not achieved through sudden renunciation or forced effort, but through sustained reflection, observation, and deliberate action. One must cultivate the ability to witness the mind and emotions without judgment, allowing insights to emerge naturally and choices to be made consciously. Through this patient, persistent practice, the silent elimination of fear, resentment, and external validation becomes a lived reality, creating the conditions for genuine transformation, authentic engagement with life, and the emergence of the self as a coherent, autonomous, and creative presence. Life is full of patterns, many of which are invisible yet profoundly influential. Among these patterns are habits, routines, and distractions that quietly shape our existence, often without our conscious awareness. These unexamined habits are like currents in a river, carrying us along a course we may not have chosen, yet adhering to them feels natural, inevitable, and unavoidable. To change one's life, it is essential to identify these currents, observe them, and then consciously release those that no longer serve the growth and evolution of the self. Habits are not merely actions repeated mechanically, they are reflections of the inner state, expressions of hidden beliefs, and manifestations of unconscious patterns. Each unexamined habit carries within it the potential to reinforce limitation, maintain stagnation, or block the emergence of a more conscious and authentic self. The first step is awareness, the act of observing the habits that govern behavior, thought, and emotion without judgment, simply as an honest witness to the life one currently lives. Distractions, both subtle and overt, are another force that quietly erodes the energy available for transformation. Modern life presents countless stimuli, from the incessant pull of technology to the expectations of social and professional life. Each distraction, seemingly minor, diminishes attention and draws energy away from the inner work that leads to self-realization. When a person allows themselves to be constantly diverted, they lose connection with the deeper currents of their being, the inner voice that calls toward authenticity and purpose. These distractions may manifest as social engagements, compulsive consumption, idle entertainment, or endless multitasking. While none of these are inherently wrong, when they dominate the landscape of daily life, they prevent focus, reflection, and the cultivation of meaningful engagement with the self. The elimination of unnecessary distractions is therefore a silent yet profound act of reclaiming the interior life and creating the conditions for conscious transformation. Unexamined habits are often sustained by unconscious beliefs and unacknowledged emotion. These patterns are rarely formed arbitrarily. They arise from the interaction between past experiences, fears, desires, and learned behaviors. Some habits are protective, shielding the self from discomfort or perceived danger, yet they may simultaneously restrict growth, creativity, and the development of authentic expression. To eliminate them requires courage, for it involves confronting the subtle comforts that bind the individual to repetition. It involves noticing where one seeks ease, where one clings to familiarity, and where one avoids the challenge of engaging with the unknown. The individual who undertakes this inner examination begins to perceive how habitual responses, automatic thoughts, repetitive behaviors, emotional reactions maintain the status quo and resist transformation. Recognition of these patterns is not condemnation, but an invitation to deeper understanding and conscious choice. Some habits are reinforced by the expectations and judgments of others. When behaviors are shaped by social norms, professional obligations, or familial pressures, they may no longer serve the individual's growth. Compliance with these external pressures can create the illusion of stability or acceptance while quietly undermining personal development. To disentangle oneself from these patterns, it is necessary to reflect upon the origins of behaviors, asking whether actions are chosen freely or enacted out of obligation, fear, or the desire to please. The process of elimination is not about rejecting all influence, but discerning what is authentic from what is inherited, conditioned, or externally imposed. This discernment requires honesty and self-awareness, a willingness to examine motivation and intentions that are often buried beneath layers of habitual thought and action. Distraction and habit are closely intertwined. Habits can serve as distractions, habitual responses that divert attention from deeper reflection or meaningful engagement. Conversely, distractions can reinforce habits by preventing conscious observation, keeping patterns hidden in the unconscious. Awareness is the key that illuminates these interactions, revealing the subtle ways in which energy is expended on automatic behaviors rather than directed toward growth. Through reflection, one can begin to distinguish between habits that support well-being and habits that obstruct it, between distractions that provide genuine enrichment and distractions that drain vitality. In this process, the individual learns to act with intentionality, aligning daily choices with deeper aspirations rather than external pressures or unconscious repetition. Eliminating unexamined habits and distractions also requires a confrontation with resistance. The mind often resists change, clinging to familiar routines even when they are harmful. This resistance is subtle, manifesting as rationalization, procrastination, or self-deception. It is reinforced by the fear of uncertainty, discomfort, or failure. Yet resistance, when acknowledged without judgment, becomes a guide, signaling areas where growth is possible, where habitual patterns must be questioned, and where conscious effort can redirect energy toward authentic living. The practice of quiet observation, reflection, and deliberate choice allows the individual to navigate this resistance with patience and insight, rather than force or self-recrimination. The elimination of unexamined habits is not a process of rigid restriction or ascetic withdrawal. It is a deliberate engagement with the life one is living, a continuous practice of noticing, reflecting, and choosing. Each action, thought, or behavior is an opportunity to discern whether it aligns with the deeper self or perpetuates unconscious patterns. The individual who cultivates this awareness develops a subtle mastery over life, not through control imposed from without, but through conscious alignment with inner truths. This mastery is gentle, largely invisible, yet its effects are profound, reshaping the way energy flows, how relationships unfold, and how the self expresses itself in the world. Distractions and unexamined habits also have an emotional dimension. They often serve to soothe anxiety, avoid discomfort, or suppress unacknowledged feelings. Yet in doing so, they prevent the full experience of life, blocking emotional depth and the awareness necessary for transformation. To release them is to engage with life more fully, to confront emotion, and to integrate experiences that may have been previously ignored, suppressed. The process is not instantaneous. It is gradual, requiring patience, introspection, and a willingness to face uncertainty without retreating into familiar patterns of avoidance. By observing habits and distractions, understanding their origins, and consciously choosing which to release, the individual begins to reclaim energy, focus, and autonomy. The space created by this elimination allows for reflection, insight, and creativity, fostering an environment in which authentic growth can flourish. The self, once obscured by automatic patterns, begins to emerge in clarity, guided not by habit or distraction, but by deliberate intention and alignment with inner purpose. The life that unfolds from this quiet work is not simpler in circumstance, but richer in meaning, coherent in direction, and attuned to the deeper currents of being. Through the deliberate elimination of unexamined habits and distractions, one cultivates the capacity to live with presence, to act with intention, and to perceive the world with clarity. Each small step of awareness accumulates into profound transformation, revealing the subtle interplay between conscious choice and unconscious pattern, between freedom and limitation, between self-realization and habitual life. In this ongoing practice, the individual moves toward a life of integrity, creativity, and authenticity, cultivating a spirit that is attuned to its own deepest truths, responsive to the inner voice, and capable of engaging fully with the unfolding of existence. Life is inherently unpredictable, and yet many of us cling to the illusion of control as if mastery over every circumstance were possible. We structure our days meticulously, plan outcomes in minute detail, and attempt to impose order on forces that are ultimately beyond our grasp. This illusion creates a subtle tension, an undercurrent of anxiety that shapes behavior and limits flexibility. To change one's life, it is essential to recognize this illusion, to release the need to control every detail, and to embrace the flow of life as it unfolds. Control, when overvalued, becomes a cage, confining the self and obscuring opportunities that emerge spontaneously. By letting go, one does not become passive or careless. Rather, one cultivates a nuanced understanding of the interplay between action and surrender, between effort and acceptance. Surrender is not weakness, nor is it resignation. It is a conscious acknowledgement of the limits of personal influence and the acceptance of life's inherent unpredictability. To surrender requires courage, for it involves trusting that the unfolding of events, though unknown, carries within it potential for growth, insight, and transformation. When one ceases to cling to outcomes, attention can shift from anxiety-driven control to present moment engagement, allowing a more authentic interaction with the circumstances of life. This is not a denial of responsibility, but a reorientation of energy, direct effort where it is meaningful, and releasing it where it is futile. In doing so, one cultivates freedom, not as the ability to dictate every detail, but as the capacity to respond wisely, creatively, and authentically to whatever arises. The need for control often arises from fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of loss, or fear of being unprepared. These fears are natural and understandable, yet when they dominate perception, they obscure clarity, distort judgment, and limit growth. By observing the ways in which control manifests, one begins to see the underlying motivations that drive rigidity, perfectionism, or over-planning. Awareness allows the individual to discern between prudent preparation and compulsive control, between necessary boundaries and unnecessary constraints. In this observation lies liberation, for it reveals the space where conscious choice can replace habitual anxiety and where flexibility can replace resistance. Embracing the unpredictability of life also requires an engagement with uncertainty. The unknown is often perceived as threatening, yet it is within the unknown that possibility resides. Every unforeseen event, every unplanned encounter, and every unexpected outcome carries potential for insight, creativity, and growth. The individual who clings to control misses these opportunities, interpreting deviations as failure rather than as openings for adaptation and discovery. By releasing rigid expectations, one cultivates a capacity to act with presence, respond with discernment, and perceive hidden patterns that were previously obscured by the insistence on control. Life becomes less a struggle against circumstance and more a dialogue with it, a continuous interplay of awareness, response, and reflection. The illusion of control is reinforced by habit, social conditioning, and cultural narratives. Society teaches that predictability, mastery, and achievement are markers of success, embedding in the psyche a subtle compulsion to maintain order and certainty. From early experiences, we are rewarded for managing outcomes, meeting expectations, and avoiding failure. These lessons, though adaptive in certain contexts, can calcify into patterns that limit openness to experience and flexibility of thought. To release the illusion of control, one must confront these ingrained beliefs, examining their origins and evaluating their relevance to the life one wishes to live. This confrontation is not confrontational but reflective, a quiet process of questioning assumptions and observing the consequences of habitual attempts to impose order. Acceptance of life's unpredictability is closely linked to the development of trust in oneself, trust in the process of living, and trust in the unfolding of events beyond conscious planning. Trust is not blind, it is informed by reflection, awareness, and experience. It allows the individual to act decisively where action is effective, while relinquishing attachment to outcome, where influence is limited. In cultivating this trust, the mind becomes less burdened by worry, the spirit less constrained by anxiety, and attention more fully available to engage with life creatively and authentically. The paradox of control is revealed here. By letting go, one gains influence, for flexibility, presence, and insight are impossible within the rigidity of obsessive management. Control also affects relationships, for the desire to manage outcomes often extends to the behavior of others, attempting to control others to shape their actions, or to anticipate their responses can create tension, resentment, and misunderstanding. It is an expression of fear projected outward, a subtle attempt to secure predictability in an inherently uncertain domain. By releasing the need to control others, one cultivates more authentic connection, allowing relationships to develop in their natural course. Engagement becomes collaborative rather than coercive, responsive rather than reactive, and grounded in mutual respect and understanding rather than fear and domination. Letting go of control does not eliminate responsibility, planning, or preparation. These remain important for navigating life effectively, yet they are undertaken with awareness rather than compulsion. Preparation is aligned with purpose, not with the avoidance of uncertainty. Action is guided by intention, not by fear. In this alignment, the individual can move through life with clarity, resilience, and creativity, capable of adapting to shifting circumstances without losing orientation or integrity. The energy once consumed by attempts to control the uncontrollable is freed for reflection, insight, and engagement with what is meaningful. The process of releasing control is deeply psychological, touching on the pattern of thought, emotion, and identity that have been cultivated over a lifetime. It requires the willingness to face discomfort, tolerate ambiguity, and question deeply held assumptions about certainty, security, and mastery. Each moment of conscious release is a step toward freedom, a subtle restructuring of perception, and a reclamation of energy previously bound by tension. This practice is ongoing, a continuous dialogue between awareness and experience, observation and action, intention and surrender. In learning to let go of the illusion of control, the individual cultivates a nuanced understanding of causality, influence, and adaptation. One sees clearly where effort is effective, where flexibility is required, and where surrender fosters growth. Life ceases to be a struggle against circumstance and becomes an engagement with its inherent flow, a process of navigating complexity with presence, insight, and creativity. The self emerges as both participant and observer, capable of discerning patterns, responding with discernment, and participating in the unfolding of life without the constraint of compulsive control. Through this process, the individual discovers that true transformation does not come from dominating the world, forcing outcomes, or eliminating uncertainty. Transformation arises from the subtle alignment of effort with insight, choice with awareness, and action with the flow of life. By relinquishing the illusion of control, one cultivates a capacity to act with authenticity, engage with clarity, and respond to life with wisdom, courage, and presence.